The River God, horrifying mix of Predator and Tatarigami monsters from Firebase shot, explained. In an absolutely bold move, Neill Blomkamp started his independent film studio in 2017 and produced several short films for free. The intention was to get feedback and support from fans on these films to convert one or more of these shorts into full-length features. As a director, he's an excellent storyteller with vivid and otherworldly imagination that holds no bars. We have seen how Blomkamp can do wonders if given artistic liberty in District 9, and how he can deliver smart and inspiring pieces of work when working on bigger budgeted films like Elysium. However, this imagination sometimes gets into conflict with production houses that don't want to take risks. He lost the directorial reins for films like Alien just because he was too different for the executives. Isn't that just outrageous? To counter these issues, Blomkamp began his own studio. Oat Studios has produced a number of flicks based around supernatural and sci-fi phenomenon. One of these is Firebase, a Vietnam war tale about how one man is chosen to fight an entity known as the River God.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The Omega Event. The film begins on an extremely grim note with a close-up shot of a US soldier garroted against a wooden pole, his body decomposing and skin rotting. Next, we see some footage that was shot in the An Giang province of Vietnam in 1969. The first is a series of aerial shots of a napalm airstrike on the dense jungles. White smoke rises from within the trees as if people in groups were lighting up massive bonfires. Next, we witness a group of soldiers patrolling an area on foot. They come across the charred remains of Viet Cong soldiers, but there's something entirely wrong and alien about these fallen warriors. The face of one of the corpses had no human jaw or teeth, and it seemed as if the facial bone below the nose transformed into fangs. The skin seemed thicker and denser than usual, as if it were the bark of a tree and could be peeled off just as easily. To add to their horrors, the unit witnesses the strangest of phenomenons. They noticed that scores of dead bodies were levitated and revolving in concentric circles. This inexplicable and gruesome event claimed 15,212 lives and 2,025 vehicles. The CIA dubbed it the Omega Event and started an investigation. More footage reveals Vietnamese women speaking about a particular man who went into the fields and started praying. The levitation took place after this, as trucks, tanks, men, houses, and choppers lost control and rose up into the air. The scene looks right from a superhero film, as if Magneto got the power to control not just metal, but all objects. Recently, the CIA declassified many of their files, including a few on UFOs. These instances lead us to believe that Blomkamp's idea remains grounded in potential reality. The Soldier and the Spear. The scene then cuts from the archive footage to what looks like a combing operation by the US military to eliminate Viet Cong guerrillas. While everyone else has heavy artillery and ammunition, one tough-looking broad man has a pointy wooden spear at his disposal. This is the first instance that we realize that the enemy might be immune to bullets, or else what would be the reason for wielding such a peculiar weapon? Our man here is Sergeant Hines, who goes through a momentary zoning out phase where he hears a sharp monotone, but then notices an underground bunker and jumps into it like a badass. It's not long before a fellow American soldier comes out of the darkness, seemingly in a trance. Hines strikes his spear against the zombie-like soldier. It pierces into the lower rib, but nothing happens. Hines pulls out the lance and goes one more time for the upper part of the chest. However, the zombie soldier grabs the weapon from his left hand and breaks it. Hines pushes and throws away his enemy in a dark corner of a bunker before tossing a stun grenade at him. And brothers and sisters, what comes out of the darkness is beyond the imagination of either of us. It was one of the Spider-Men. No, not your good old friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but something completely opposite. It was an eyeless humanoid creature with skin shedding off and an entire torso that was bloody and fleshy. We hear the first actual dialogue at about 5 minutes from the start. If it were a 2-hour feature film, then by comparison, the first dialogue came after about 30 minutes from the beginning. Hines emptied 9 rounds of ammo from his pistol before the creature presumably succumbed.
There he was, just standing there.
The Tale of Two Cities, Quatro and Tarheel. The following morning, 3 choppers reach Ground Zero and CIA agent Jacob Palmer comes to escort Sergeant Hines to an army base. Along with Agent Palmer is Sergeant Carr of the Studies and Observation Group. Hines had deserted his unit to go and look for the strange creatures and started working with the CIA. The men board a chopper on which Palmer tells Hines about Firebase Quatro, located just outside Tay Ninh on the border of Cambodia.
Outside Tay Ninh on the border of Cambodia.
The COA had set up a base there to track the river god, the master of all these entities. He informs Pine that the river god was once a simple Vietnamese farmer and that the survivors of his attack are kept under care in the field hospital at the fort. So Hines is taken to a major named Brickerson, a survivor of the river god who can still talk. At Firebase Quadro, Brickerson explains his ordeal, noting his men faced a Viet Cong ambush and the enemies would not die even by bullets. So Brickerson and his men retreated to another base called Firebase Tarheel, where they awaited reinforcements and requested a napalm airstrike. However, Firebase Tarheel had been destroyed by the enemy. The napalm strike burned the jungle down, and that's when Brickerson saw the monster that he couldn't understand. It was visible only because of the napalm that was sticking to it, and it was just standing in one place, without any pain or suffering. Invisible and invincible, Brickerson warns that his men were scared and shocked by what they saw. The big bad river god. Hines and Palmer meet Corporal Richard Bracken, the sole survivor of the events at Tarheel. The right side of Bracken's face had third-degree burns, his skin had melted, and even the flesh had burned. Palmer asked him to narrate his ordeals at Firebase Tarheel. Bracken and his men left the base in the morning when the Navy SEALs found something strange. The job of Bracken's unit was to get additional intel on it. Back at Tarheel, he and his men were shooting in every direction at Viet Cong guerrillas who had pinned the Americans down. While his soldiers were being shot out of nowhere, Bracken saw a skeletal figure walk towards him. As it came closer, flesh chunks flew towards him and joined his bones to form a hulking, muscular but skinless monster with numerous bony spikes protruding from its back. He was the river god himself, and he just kept staring at Bracken, who was in the state of trauma and shock. Was it really a god? Was it an alien? Was it the devil himself? Bracken must have been wondering about these basic questions while thinking about his life. However, in a strange turn of events, 1 minute Bracken was staring straight into the eyes of the thing, and the next moment Bracken found himself at the Charleston Air Base in South Carolina on the day of his deployment, meaning the river god had the capability to change the space-time continuum. By extension, he could physically alter time and space. You can think of it as something like moving a pencil on a table. If Bracken was the pencil and the table was time and space, he just moved Bracken from one point to another, physically. The South Carolina base was under attack, and a modified Russian aircraft came along and burned Bracken and other soldiers with huge flamethrowers. Bracken was burning, but strangely, he had got pulled into the water by his mate Freddy and others back in the Vietnamese jungles. It had happened again, and he had traveled once again through space and time. Basically, Bracken was pulled out of South Carolina into Vietnam. On the other side of the river, he saw the reanimated corpses of his unit. The river god was raising the dead, probably in an attempt to create his own army. Remember the zombie-like American soldier that Hines fought in the beginning? The insides of these undead soldiers developed into insect-like cartilages, and they had sharp, straight claws instead of arms, just on the lines of scorpions. Hines and Palmer let Bracken rest, and it is decided that he'll be enrolled as an MIA along with 318 other soldiers who died at Firebase Tarheel. As for Tarheel itself, it never existed.
Objects were put in.
The Son of Life versus the Demon of Nature. Now that the river god's location was known, Hines was tasked with leading a group of men to hunt him down. However, before that, Hines and Palmer have a little heart-to-heart. This was the first time that Hines discussed his visions and the noises that he'd heard in his head. Palmer was a CIA agent, and naturally, he had his homework done on Hines. He had spoken to the members of Hines' unit and had read his files. They believed that it was as if Hines was being helped, guided, and protected by some divine intervention, that the universe didn't want him to die. Objects were put in his path to protect him from incoming assaults, be it bullets or shrapnel from grenades. As if life itself knew that he was coming, and the universe was keeping him alive because it had a plan for Hines, a job to finish. Now, was finishing off the River God a part of this? Moving on to River God, as discussed earlier, he was a regular villager who was not involved in the war and took no sides. However, the war came to his house and killed his loving wife and beautiful children. The incident left him with such grief that his mind could control the very matter around him. His flesh tore off, and gradually only his skeleton remained. But he was more powerful now than ever. He didn't understand that he was spreading deadly horror around him. But once he did, he came to a North Vietnamese army base and sought help. By this point, he had abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, and invisibility. The river god has now gone completely rogue and needed to be eliminated. The plan is to burn the entire jungle so that napalm would stick to his body, making him visible. However, there remains one problem. The river god can change the very fabric of matter in his surroundings, and therefore he can kill anyone by changing their interiors or even resurrect the fallen. The officers at Firebase Quatro provide Hines with a specially made prototype suit called the Relativity Capsule. The exoskeleton shields the wearer from electromagnetic waves by creating a magnetosphere. This would help Hines' reality to remain unbroken by the powers of the river god. However, just safeguarding the reality is not going to help. So Hines is provided with an electromagnetic railgun that fires at about 1/20th the speed of light. This is the weapon that would hopefully take the river god down. So armed with a suit that would shield Hines from getting his reality warped and a special weapon to hunt his target, he leaves for the chopper.
And I just seen him there looking at me.
What was the river god? As we discussed above, the river god was once a mortal man who had a wife and a child, but the horrors of war took that away from him, and as a result he went through a drastic physical and mental transformation. His mental state transformed so much that he started using a lot more of his brain capacity. He could warp the reality around him and also become invisible. Blomkamp's idea behind the monster was that the river god was an anomaly or an error of the universe. If we consider the universe as a software, then the river god was a bug, and Hines was the self-correcting piece of code that the software employed to rectify the mistake. The river god is able to see beyond the perceived existence, and he simply breaks through to see what lies behind it. You can think of it as a character who lives in virtual stimulation and sees through that cyber interface to come into the real world. Once there, the river god plays through the concepts of space, time, and even thermodynamics. However, he's not doing things out of his own free will, but basically acting on his subconsciousness and instincts as a natural predator. Coming to Hines, he acts as an antibody against the virus. If we consider the body to be the universe, the river god becomes the virus that Hines is supposed to take down and kill.
Still drawn to it. You have to kill it, yeah?
He doesn't understand why he's drawn towards the river god and only knows that he has to finish the monster.
Mind is set free.
Predator, The Thing, Tatarigami, and other influences on the river god. Like the predator, the river god is an apex beast of nature. Predators hunt in hot and humid places like dense evergreen forests, and in the short film Firebase, the river god doesn't seem to leave the jungles of Vietnam. Yes, the motives behind the killings differ entirely, but the modus operandi and physical abilities like invisibility and near invincibility in the two creatures are very much the same. Secondly, by using its powers to reanimate dead people, the river god makes monsters in the shape of men. Now, where else did we notice such accurate shapeshifting? Yes, you've probably guessed it right. John Carpenter's The Thing is probably one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever made, and its titular monster has the natural ability to metamorph into any living being. Likewise, the river god uses his powers to bend the very fabric of matter inside a dead man and makes him alive again. Well, almost alive. The undead people retain their skin, but on the inside they become these hideous insect-like critters with cartilage instead of bones and teeth. The 1997 anime Princess Mononoke mentions demons called Tatarigami. These are parasites that get into the flesh of their hosts and weaken their minds. The Tatarigami take control of their host and turn them into beasts that only know to hate and wreak havoc to their surroundings. The flesh changes color and gets diseased, while the prey eventually gets consumed by the creatures. Likewise, the river god was not doing what he was doing by his free will. The truest form of hate consumed him, and the emotion took such immense control of him that he lost his mind, body, and soul. The entire short film feels like an upgraded version of an X-Files episode with high-quality visual effects. The river god was created using a mix of practical effects and computer-generated imagery. The plot of the film follows a similar concept where Scully and Mulder would find out about a supernatural entity and go about hunting it down. However, since it's a Vietnam War film, it bears an uncanny resemblance with features like Full Metal Jacket. In that flick, soldiers face the brunt of war, but their state worsens under the command of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. Likewise, Firebase has similar undertones where the soldiers don't understand what they are fighting, and the lack of information from the government officials pushes them to possibly staging a mutiny. Improbable Future. Oat Studios has started a public fundraiser campaign to turn Firebase into a live-action feature film. However, they couldn't garner enough money to make it and decided to give up the project for the time being. As a shot, Firebase looks fantastic. Apart from a few sound issues, the movie looks great in terms of story, acting, effects, and direction. If turned into a full-length film, it would do wonders.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
As a god walking the earth, his mind is set free.